A gute Woche und a guten Chodesh. Rabbi soll gesund sein, began the Farbrengen this afternoon. How every day we say Kol yoima v'yoima ovid aviditei. It's an expression pertaining every single day, that every day has its inyan. Mamela, when we're talking about today, which is Shabbos Mevorchim Odar Rishon, there's the special inyan which Shabbos Mevorchim Odar Rishon has. Besides the fact that it is Shabbos Mevorchim, but Shabbos Mevorchim we have more than once a year. Every month we have a Shabbos Mevorchim. The specialty of today is the fact that it is Shabbos Mevorchim Odar Rishon. Immediately when we say Odar Rishon, this in itself is an indication that there is a second Odar. Otherwise this one wouldn't be called Rishon. Now then, when we refer to this one as Rishon, Rishon is always a Maila. It's always a plus. The first. Besides that, the month of Adar is a very special month. Because when we read in the Megillah, there's a pasuk, V'hachodesh asher nepach lehem miyogin l'simcha. We read regarding the month of Adar that the entire month was converted. Instead of being a month of sadness, chas v'shalom, it was converted to a month that brings joy, that brings happiness. So we see right away that the Yontif of Purim, which is usually in the month of Adar, is not limited only to its day that it's being celebrated, but it has an effect on the entire month. To such an extent that there is a halach in Shulchan Aruch that if one has to do something with goyim, in a case or an argument or a dispute or so, the best thing he should see to it that it should be settled in the month of Adar, because the month of Adar is a suitable month for Yidden to settle in Yonim. It's a successful month for Yidden. Furthermore, the Rebbe says there's a Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi tells us something very interesting, that normally we are obligated to read the Megillah on Purim. We know the Mishnah in the beginning of Masechta Megillah tells us cases when the Megillah will not be read on Purim, but the Megillah could be read prior to Purim a few days. But as the Gemara Megillah, the Mishnah Megillah only goes back to the 11th day in Adar. The Yerushalmi tells us that if one will be faced with a condition where he will not be able to hear the Megillah on Purim, for whatever reason, he's allowed to read the Megillah from the beginning of the month of Adar, from Rosh Chodesh Adar. So again, we have an indication that not only is the day affected, the day of Purim, but it changes the entire month. It becomes a happy and joyful month. Now the question arises, obviously all this pertains to Adar Sheni, not to Adar Rishon. So when the Gemara discusses why we celebrate Purim and Adar Sheni, and we don't celebrate it in Adar Rishon, the Gemara gives a reason for it. Gemara gives a reason, Mismach Geula leGeula. We like to bring close to Inyanim of Geula. Adar Sheni we will celebrate Purim, which is the Geula. Then the month after Adar Sheni we have Nisan, then we celebrate Yitzias Mitzrayim, which is also an inyan of Geula. So the Chachamim have preferred that it should be in such type of a system of Mismach Geula leGeula. However, the Rebbe says, all the spiritual inyanim that the month of Adar possesses, this is not limited only to the Adar Sheni. This Adar Rishon also has. So Mamela, now that we are benching today Adar Rishon, we are entering this great and special and outstanding month. So when we are saying in the Megillah, the month which was turned over, a month which was converted from a month of which should have been Chas v'Shalom sorrow, and it turned into joy, It refers to Adar Rishon just as well as to Adar Sheni. The only thing is there are certain halachic requirements which we are obligated to do in the month of Adar, and that we fulfill in the month of Adar Sheni. However, all the spiritual advantages which the month of Adar gives us, this the Rebbe says we have in both months. We have it in Adar Rishon and we have it in Adar Sheni. And especially based on the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov teaches us, the Rebbe quotes in Tanya, in Shara Yichud Ve'emunah, on the pasuk of La'olam Hashem Devorcha Nitzav B'Shamayim, that everything, the entire Bria, the entire creation is constantly being renewed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, constantly being recreated again. Otherwise it wouldn't survive. So the Rebbeinu Shalom has to be Mehave, creating the world anew again every moment so that it creates, so that it exists. When Meilat comes out, the Rebbe says that it is a new world and a new month of Adar. So it's extremely meaningful, the spiritual explanation what Adar stands for, and this applies to both Adars. Especially based on what the Gemara says. And the pasuk la Yehudim Haisa Oira v'Simcha v'Sasa v'Yikar, that the month of Purim brought Oira, Lichtigkeit, illumination, to illuminate, light, Simcha, joy, Sasa, happiness. And Chazal interpret this pasuk that it means Oira zu Torah v'Sasa. It all pertains to various mitzvahs, beginning with Torah. So Mamela, this lesson of la Yehudim Haisa Oira v'Simcha v'Sasa v'Yikar, this also is not limited only to Adar Sheni. In the month of Adar Rishon, we are also obligated to increase in our learning of Torah and our fulfilling of mitzvahs, and do things with the spirit of Adar, with the spirit of Purim. And all of this could be done with the proper way, when we take on the proper resolutions on this day, which is a suitable day for it, which is the day of Shabbos Mevochim, to see to it to bring everything down into Hamaisa, who Ikar, action, deed, which is the most important. Here the Rebbe referred to an interesting shaila. There's a Magen Avram, which is a Pesach in the Rechai. The Rebbe tells us that the Alter Rebbe, when he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, relied a lot on the Magen Avram. In fact, the Rebbe says, it's told by Chassidim, it is related that the Alter Rebbe, at his older age, regretted why he relied so much on the Magen Avram. But anyways, the Magen Avram discusses a question: if one was born in there are various questions around. If one is born in a regular year, for example, then the shaila is, what month should he have his bar mitzvah in when his bar mitzvah comes out in a leap year, when there are two others? And there's a Magen Avram and a Rechaim which discusses all these shailas. In fact, the Magen Avram also raises an opinion: if one is born in Adar Rishon, in other words, he is born in a leap year, and when his bar mitzvah year also comes out to be a leap year, the Magen Avram is under the impression that his bar mitzvah should be in Adar Sheni, not in Adar Rishon. But regardless, the question of bar mitzvahs, various ways, the year of being born and the year when it comes out to bar mitzvah, is discussed in the Magen Avram. And the Alter Rebbe in his Shulchan Aruch does not discuss this question. And in fact, the siman where the Magen Avram discusses it in Orach Chaim, that same siman, the Alter Rebbe quotes many opinions of the Magen Avram, and regarding this question, he doesn't mention anything. The Rebbe says, obvious, it's a question. Why does the Alter Rebbe ignore discussing this shayla? Unless the Rebbe says, which could be interpreted, that we know that the Alter Rebbe was planning to write a second Mahadura, a second edition to the Shulchan Aruch. And what we have today, the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, is only the first edition. Only on the first 4 Simanim, we also have the Mahadura Tinyana, the second edition which he began writing. Could very well be, the Rebbe says, that the Alter Rebbe intended that when he will write it in the second edition, and he will get up to reach this siman where these halachas are discussed, he will discuss it there. But the fact is, for whatever reason, the Alter Rebbe does not quote the Magen Avraham or Bechlal this shaila regarding when one should celebrate his bar mitzvah in Adar Rishon or in Adar Sheni, and again when one was born on a leap year or on a regular year and so forth. Which this is a shaila which is discussed in Paskim. Now there are, for example, the halachas of the month of Adar, the halachas of Purim, we Bechlal don't have in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Because we know that there are many simanim in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch which did not reach us. I mean, there are stories that there was fires and it was burnt, and we don't have the entire text of the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. But earlier in the Eira Chaim, in the siman, I think it's siman Nun the Rebbe mentioned, where the Magen Avraham does discuss these shailas, in that siman the Alter Rebbe also does not mention it. But could very well be, as the Rebbe said, he planned on discussing it when he would write the second edition of the Shulchan Aruch. Later in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe continued. He says, we are talking constantly in the Siches, referring to the coming of Mashiach. And obviously, all those present here who planned their Shabbos and began planning the Shabbos a couple days before Shabbos, and we have already planned our days after Shabbos, and kind of like we did not put into our schedule for the coming of Mashiach. I mean, the Rebbe didn't use these words, but this is basically the idea which... And some will say, we already announced when Rosh Chodesh will be. Just Rosh Chodesh is tomorrow. We also called out in Shul, before benching Rosh Chodesh, when the Moiled will be. It means when the new moon begins. So everything is like kind of set already. So the Rebbe says, but the truth is, we know we are constantly hoping for the coming of Mashiach. And he says, what he's going to say now is purely based on halacha. Spelled out very clearly in halacha svarim, beginning from the Rambam. The Rambam tells us, Hifticha Torah, the Torah has pledged, has guaranteed that before the coming of Mashiach, Yidden will do tshuva. Now we have another halacha. We have a halacha if one is mekadesh es isha. If one is mekadesh a woman, al menas shani tzadik gomel, on the condition that he is a tzaddik, and this person is not known to be a tzaddik. The halacha is she is mekudeshes. The kedushin is a valid kedushin. Why? Because we say that a person has a possibility of doing tshuva b'shaita chada uberiga chada. A man could do tshuva, a person could do tshuva momentarily. Now, in other words, tshuva does not have to take a long time. One could do tshuva instantly. So it's not a question of long procedures. When we say it's going to take a long time for people to do tshuva, tshuva could be done right away. We also have another halacha. There is a halacha regarding the third Beis Hamikdash, that the Beis Hamikdash is bonui, oimed ubonui, where it's not going to be a time consuming to go ahead and build the Beis Hamikdash, because the Beis Hamikdash is standing there, built, erected, with all its details. It is just waiting for the right moment when the Beis Hamikdash, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu will decide to reveal the Beis Hamikdash and let it down on this earth. There is another halacha, which is again a halacha in the Rambam, that a person should realize at all times that al yidei ma'isa achas u'pa'ula achas, through one act, or one deed, one good act or deed of a person, he can be machriya es atzmoi ves kol ha'olam kuloi. He can weigh over. Rambam explains the world is like a scale, and one person doing one good deed could weigh over the entire scale, and this can have an effect on the entire world, that he will be machriya. The Rambam uses the expression, he will be machriya es atzmoi ves kol ha'olam kuloi lekaf schus. He will weigh over himself and the entire world and bring favor to everyone, to the entire world. The Rebbe says, based on all these halachas, we can expect Mashiach right away. And should Mashiach come right away, it's not going to take us long. We will all arrive in Eretz Yisrael. And then, if we will come to Eretz Yisrael, we will have the Beis Din, and then we will be able to bring witness. Then the system of starting a new month will be different than it's now. Now we know we work it with a calendar. In the times of the Beis HaMikdash, the arrangement was that two witnesses had to come to Bezin, and the Bezin were in the Lishkas HaGozes in Yerushalayim in the Beis HaMikdash, and they would tell them that they saw the new moon, and all the details of the procedure which the Gemara tells us, and that's how they would set a new month, and Bezin would say, Mikudash, Mikudash, the new month has begun. And Al Pi Halacha, this is allowed to be done even on Shabbos. Even on Shabbos, if Eidos see, two witnesses have seen the new moon, they are permitted to come to Bezdin and tell them that they saw the new moon. They saw that.
They met on Shabbos.
Pardon?
They met on Shabbos.
But it seems like they were able to contact them. Mamela, the Rebbe says, we could really, in reality, and all of this is based on pure halacha, not have Rish Chodesh exactly the way it was set up for today and tomorrow, in other words, for Sunday and Monday to be Rish Chodesh, could be when we will come to Eretz Yisrael, and then we will not do it anymore and according to the calendar, but we will do it according to witness. Witness, based on witness, will come to Bezdin and tell them that they saw the new moon, and that's when Bezdin will proclaim the new month. So Rish Chodesh may be pushed off with a day or so. The Rebbe says he's, like everybody, is probably looking at all of this very strange. To say that Mashiach is going to come tonight, or right away, and we're right away going to go to Eretz Yisrael. And here the Rebbe says, in Gemara there's an expression regarding the distance from Yerushalayim with eating karbanis. So Gemara there discusses that if one would travel on a gomel, one would travel on a camel, certain amount of kilometers, the distance of Yerushalayim. The Rebbe says the Gemara Taka uses this expression. But today, for us to travel to Yerushalayim and around Yerushalayim, there's no more need to travel on a camel. There are different, more sophisticated ways to how we can travel. And definitely these ways will be utilized. Mela, the Rebbe says it probably sounds very strange how we're talking about really, but there's a chance that within a day we will be in Eretz Yisrael with Mashiach and with the Beis HaMikdash. So the Rebbe says, does anyone ever sit down, close the door of his room, and sit down seriously, beginning to evaluate himself? Is he really ready for the coming of Mashiach? And that when Mashiach is going to come, he's literally going to take himself, in other words, everybody pertaining to himself, out of Golas and take us to Eretz Yisrael? Do we ever sit down and think for a moment such type of a cheshbon, to make such a calculation that Mashiach can come and will come any moment and take us out of Golas, and will take every one of us out of Golas? Take us out of Golas, take us to Eretz Yisrael, the Beis HaMikdash will be coming down right away, and there we will be in the Beis HaMikdash, and living a completely different type of life. Because the problem is we never sit down to think about it in a serious way, in a sitting down beinei lebein atzmei, amongst, in other words, within ourselves, really making such type of a conclusion, such type of a decision, realizing that Mashiach will come, and Mashiach will come right away to take us out of Golas. And, in other words, would we really be doing such type of calculations? Then it wouldn't sound that strange when we're talking about it, that Mashiach can come right away and take us right away out of Golas, and this will even have an impact that the day of Rosh Chodesh will be changed, maybe postponed a day or so. Then the Rebbe continued, another inyan which is important to discuss this month, the Rebbe says, is now we are at the end of the month of Shvat. At the very end of the month of Shvat, today is Chavtes, and tomorrow is Lamet. And to show how close we are today to Lamet, Lamet is the last day of the month. So today on Chof Tes, we are already not reciting Tzidkas Tzedek to Mincha because it's Erev Rosh Chodesh. So this shows how this day has a shaykhs to tomorrow already. Why don't we say Tzidkas today, this afternoon? Because today has a shaykhs to tomorrow. And tomorrow is the last day of the month. There's an expression in Gemara, Hakol hoylech acha hachitum, everything goes according to the end, according to the closing. And mainly to us, it's important this month, because this month we had the 10th day of Shvat, and that's the Yortzeit of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And mainly when we come to the end of the month, the Rebbe says it's an opportune time to review within ourselves and to make proper decisions about fulfilling the wish of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And the Frierdiker Rebbe's wish was the inyan of Afatzas HaMayonos and Afatzas HaYadus, to reach out with Yiddishkeit and with Chassidus to each and every Jew. And one of the very famous mottos of the Frierdiker Rebbe was La'alter li'geula, la'alter li'tshuva. The Frierdiker Rebbe arrived here in the United States. He came out with a quotation which called for immediate geula and immediate tshuva. In other words, this is another step closer to prepare ourselves for the coming of Mashiach. Incidentally, it just dawned on me when the Rebbe was talking before about the month of Adar, the impact the entire month had. The Rebbe was describing how in the days of the miracle of Purim, the Megillah tells us, "V'rabim me'amei ha'oretz misyadim." There were many of the Goyim who converted and became Yidden at that time, out of respect of the great nace which they saw of HaKadosh Baruch Hu performing for the Yidden. Furthermore, the Rebbe says, even those who did not convert, who did not become Gerim, who were sich not Misyahe, did not become Yidden, at least it was Nafal Pachad Mordechai Aleim. The fear of Mordechai fell on all the Goyim. Well, it gives us like an idea how one type of an effect it had on all the Goyim of Malchus HaChashverosh in those days. And mainly the same when we're talking about spiritually, how this has an effect on the entire month. Let us get back to where we're up to. An inyan which the Rebbe discussed in today's Farbrengen, which came behemshech to what he spoke about, continuation to what was discussed previous Farbrengens, is regarding the mitzvah of Gemilas Chesed, which means helping another Jew with a loan when he is in need of it. Now the Rambam uses the expression mitzvahs esei lahalvois la'aniya Yisrael. It is a mitzvah asay min HaTorah to give a loan to a poor Yid who is in need of a loan. The Alter Rebbe in his Shulchan Aruch and Hilchas Halvoah quotes the same Rambam, mitzvahs asay, it's a positive mitzvah, lahalvois la'aniya Yisrael. The question arises, which was discussed the previous Farbrengen. We know the Gemara tells us, it's a Gemara in Sukkah, that Gemilas Chesed is bein la'aniyim and bein la'ashirim. It is a mitzvah to give a loan to a poor person. It is also a mitzvah to give a loan to a rich person. However, he is rich, but at this moment he's in need of cash. His assets are tied up. He does not have liquid money at this moment. So the Torah tells us it's a mitzvah to give a loan to this person as well. And the interpretation is given in Gemara. Pasuk says, Pasuk in this week's Seder, in fact, Im kesef talves ami esa oni imach. If you will lend money to my people, to my nation, Rabbeinu Shalom says, the poor person with you, so Chazal interpret that this wealthy person, being that now he's in need of a loan because he does not have liquid money available, he is considered poor at this time. So it's no difference with a person who is takanor a man. Poor before and poor later and poor now. Or one who is just poor at this moment, it is our mitzvah to help both of them with a Gemilas Chesed. Question arises, however, on the Rambam, as well as on the Alter Rebbe. Why does the Alter Rebbe and the Rambam use the expression mitzvah sasei lahalva isla niya Yisrael? the mitzvah is only to lend to poor Jews. At the time we just discussed, based on the Gemara, that the mitzvah is not only to lend to poor Jews, but it's a mitzvah to lend to any Jew. In fact, we will look into the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Rebbe says the Alter Rebbe is known for giving reasons on mitzvahs. We will see that when the Alter Rebbe interprets this, discusses this halacha, he quotes the Rambam. Again, mitzvah saseh, it's a positive mitzvah, lahalvis laniye Yisrael. And at the time, we know that it's a mitzvah not only to lend laniye Yisrael, as we just mentioned, gemilas chesed is bein laniyim or bein lashirim. Gemilas chesed is to the poor and to the rich as well. So the Rebbe is explaining this, that we find in the Rambam, in the Sefer HaMitzvahs of the Rambam, there are shoroshim. Shoroshim in Hebrew means roots. But actually it's like an introduction written by the Rambam himself to the Sefer HaMitzvahs, with many shoroshim, and these shoroshim are basically rules, ground rules, written by the Rambam, how we go about, what inyanim are, go into the count of the 613 mitzvahs. And there in Sheirish Sheni, in the second Sheirish, the Rambam raises the question, what is about inyanim that we derive from a pasuk? We know there are Yud Gimel Midois Shatayra Nidreshes Behem. We recite that every day in davening. Kal v'choyma, Gzeira Shava, something which we learn up with a method of a Kal v'choyma, or something which we learn with a method of a Gzeira Shava. Is this considered one of the Taryag mitzvahs, or isn't it? Or furthermore, something which we learn up from an extra word in a pasuk, or based on a pasuk. In other words, not something new which the Chachamim have introduced, something which the Chachamim have interpreted in the pasuk. Is this considered a mitzvah min HaTorah, or isn't it? So the Rambam tells us that this is not considered a mitzvah min HaTorah. We're obligated to do that. It does not go into the count of the Sheva mitzvahs midrabanan, but to say that this is one of the Taryag mitzvahs min HaTorah, we cannot say. Now, if we look into the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe explains the mitzvah of lending money to a Jew. The Alter Rebbe says the poor person we have to lend because the Torah tells us, "Esa'oni imach." Why do we have to lend to a rich one who is in need of a gemilas chesed at this moment? So the Alter Rebbe tells us, it's a chazal, but the Alter Rebbe brings this opinion. Being that the pasuk tells us, "Im kesef talves ami," you will lend money to my nation. The rich person is also a member of the nation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so we are fulfilling the mitzvah by lending money to es ami, to anyone in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's nation. However, who does the pasuk talk about beferish explicitly? Only about the oni, only about the poor person. Now when the Rambam comes and tells us what the mitzvah saseh is, as well as the Alter Rebbe the same, the mitzvah saseh is lahalveis la'aniyei Yisrael. The mitzvah saseh is to lend to the poor yid. The Chachamim have also learned from an extra word in the pasuk that not only is it a mitzvah to lend to a poor yid, it's a mitzvah to lend to any yid who is in need of a gemilas chesed. However, we cannot say that giving a gemilas chesed to an ashir is part of the mitzvah saseh and is one of the Taryag mitzvahs HaTorah. This we cannot say. So now we understand why the Rambam uses the expression mitzvah saseh lahalveis la'aniyei Yisrael, and the same thing the Alter Rebbe, because the mitzvah saseh to fulfill the mitzvah of im kesef talves ami, this is fulfilled only by lending la'aniyei Yisrael. However, giving a gemilas chesed to any yid, this is also a mitzvah, no question about it, which is derived whether from the word es ami or whether from the word ha'ani imach, that ba'isa shah anihu, regardless. From where we derive it, it is still not one of the Taryag mitzvahs. In Farbrengen, the Rebbe also referred to an inyan which was discussed previous Farbrengens, and that's based on a chazal of daber echad ladoir v'lo shnei daborim. It means that at one time there could only be one leader, one nasi to a generation, and not two. Rebbe said that he was confronted with a question that he explained this inyan in different Farbrengens and explained it differently in each of the Farbrengens. One Farbrengen, he explained it very simple. Being that human nature is ein deyeseim Shabbos, two people don't have the same way of thinking and the same approach to everything. So if you cannot have one, you could have one leader to a generation, but if you're going to have two leaders, two people leading a generation, it's going to lead to conflicts. One will say one way, the other one will say differently. It'll be conflicting opinions. That's one interpretation he gave. And other Farbrengens came out a different type of interpretation. Why daber echad ladoyer v'lo shnei daborim? Primarily based on a completely different approach. That and not mitzad the nasi, but mitzad the recipients, mitzad the people. People can only deal with one leader. It's hard on people to deal with two leaders, to receive leadership from two. In other words, it's like kind of a chesarn in the mekablim, in those who have to be mekabil from the nasi hadoyer, that if they will have two nasiim. The Rebbe says he was asked why in one Farbrengen he explained it one way, and in another Farbrengen he explained it different. The Rebbe says very simple. He says if he will be saying in all Farbrengens the same interpretations, then the Rebbe says he will lose the audience. He says people come and have to sit through a Farbrengen. So if at least every time you leave with a new thought, okay, it's acceptable. But if he's going to be repeating thoughts from one Farbrengen and again and the same other Farbrengen is the same things, then he says people will shar sich harais, will get their way out of coming to Farbrengens. Another Rambam which the Rebbe discussed in today's Farbrengen was in today's Shir of the Rambam, which is the conclusion of Hilchais Nachlois. In Hilchais Nachlois, the Rambam concludes how we are to protect the interest of Yisoimim, of orphans. The Rambam describes how Bezdin, how the Jewish court would set an apotropos. An apotropos would be somebody to be in charge of all the properties, to manage the finances of the Yisoimim. Then the Rambam says, Afal pi she'ena apotropos, the last halacha, in Perek Yud Aleph of Hilchas Nachlas. The Rambam tells us, Afal pi she'ena apotropos sorich lasos cheshm, he's not obligated to give us an exact accounting, how he managed with the funds of the Yisoimim, Kemoshe bi'anu, as we already explained. Because the Rambam explained previously that if we would make the halachas on this apotropos would be very strict, then one would refrain from being an apotropos. He would say, why does he have to get involved in it? Later he will have to account every cent. So he'll rather stay away from it. So al pi halacha ain't tzorich. In other words, he's not tzorich, he's not obligated to give us an exact accounting how he's dispersed the money of the Yisoimim. Still, the Rambam tells us tzorich lechashev beinu lebein atzmoi. He has to make an honest calculation amongst within himself. Ledakteik uleizoya harbe, has to be very careful. Why me'avian shalelu, from the real father of the orphans, haYisoimim? Who is that? Shehu roichev aravis. Roichev aravis is a title under Rabbeinu Shalom. The Rambam quotes a pasuk, Soilu leroichev ba'aravis avi Yisoimim. So we see that the Rabbeinu Shalom is considered the father of the Yisoimim, and therefore he has to take that in consideration to be careful that he spends every cent of the Yisoimim's money in an honest way. Because the Rabbeinu Shalom is really the one who's watching him. It's a title for the Rabbeinu Shalom. Before this, we have another halacha in the Rambam. Rambam tells us a remarkable halacha. Ein poiskin alein tzedakah afilu lepidyon shvuyim. Why? Mipnei mitzvahs elu ein lahem kitzvah. Rambam says that when there are funds of orphans who are being managed by an apotropos, the apotropos does not have to take part in any tzedakahs and any charitable funds which are being raised, the Yisayimim are not obligated to give. Ein Paiskin alei and stock. Why does the Rambam say? These mitzvahs have no end. Once you start giving tzedakah, you could keep on giving and giving and giving. They'll keep on giving and giving, being that they have a limited amount of money which they have inherited from their father, from their parents. So the entire amount which is there could just be dispersed on tzedakah, and they will be left without anything. So that's where the Rambam says, even when we're talking about a mitzvah like Pidyon Shvuyim, which is such an important mitzvah, the Yisayimim here are part of this mitzvah. So the Rebbe asked, how could we say that the mitzvah of tzedakah, we say mitzvahs eilu ein lahem kitzvah, they are endless? It's not so. We know al pi halacha how much one is obligated to give. One is obligated to give maisa, a tenth of his earnings. At the most, Gemara tells us, hamevazveis al yevazveis yoysa mechaimish. If one wants to splurge, one wants to give in a broad way on tzedakah, he shouldn't give more than a fifth. So at least more, he will give up to a fifth, but more than that he wouldn't give. So why does the Rambam say mitzvah say lo ilam kitzvah? It does have a kitzvah. What is the kitzvah? The most at chaimish, at 20%, but not more than that. So what the Rebbe is learning is being that there is an apotropos here who is in charge of the nechasim of the Yisayimim, but still the Yisayimim are also involved, and they're also knowing what's going on. And being that they are youngsters, it is hard for them to set a borderline that they will give tzedakah only up to 10% to 20% and not more. So they will exceed a little bit. They will go a little bit above the 20%. And next time they are approached again, they may do it again, and so forth. So Mamela, being that there is a possibility that they shouldn't be able to control themselves properly, when we're talking about the mitzvah of tzedakah, that is why the Rebbe says the Rambam paskins that they were exempt from these mitzvahs. Regarding the Rashi in this week's Sedre, Rebbe raised a question on a Rashi in Parshas Mishpatim towards the end of the Sedre. In Kapitel Chav Daled, Pasuk Yud Aleph, it is after Shvi, a few psukim before Mafta. Pasuk uses the expression Ve'elatzile b'nei Yisrael l'sholach yodei. What means Atzile? Rebishter did not stretch out his arm to the Atzile b'nei Yisrael. What is the meaning of Atzile? It seems like Atzile is a word which is not popular in Chumash or in Tanakh. So that's why Rashi has to tell us what Atzile is. So we look into Rashi on Pasuk Yud Aleph. Rashi tells us Atzile is Loshen Gedolim. It means the elders, the most important ones amongst the Yid. How do we know that Atzile means elders? So Rashi is going to bring rayas from Psukim. So first Rashi brings a raya of a Pasuk in Yeshayahu. Uma Atzileha Chosicha. And there the teaches also that Atzil meaning an elder. Then Rashi brings a second raya. Where's the second raya from? A pasuk in Chumash Bamidbar. Vayetzal min haruach. Not enough. Rashi brings the third raya. Where's the third raya from? A pasuk in Yecheskel. Sheish Amos Atzila. Truth is, if we look into the other Mefarshei HaTorah, we will notice the Ramban, the Sepona, the Even Ezra, who are also all Mefarshim limited in the realm of Pshat, also Taich Atzile, meaning Loshen Gedula, but none of them bring three psukim, three rayas. Some bring one raya, some bring two. But none of them bring all the three rayas which Rashi brings, especially in this order. First Rashi brings a pasuk in Yeshaya. Then he comes back to a pasuk in Chumash Bamidbar. Then he goes back to Navi Yecheskel and brings a third raya. So this the Rebbe explained that Rashi wants to explain that Atzile means great, Loshen Gedolim, sei begashmius and sei beruchnius. Those who are leaders, the spiritually, as well as physically, and that it applied to many people. Atzilei b'nei Yisrael, Nodav, Avihu, and the Zaken. That's why Rashi brings first the pasuk in Yeshaya. U'ma'atzileho k'chosicha. So the Rebbe is learning the pasuk in Yeshaya is only a raya in Gashmius Gedula. Somebody who is strong and powerful, but only in Gashmius. Influential, a leader. Then Rashi brings a raya vayetzal min haruach, which is a pasuk in Chumash Bamidbar, where over there we see the word etzal or atzil used for greatness spiritually, ruach meaning spiritually. Then Rashi brings another raya from a third pasuk, from a pasuk sheish amos atzila. There the pasuk the Rebbe says is talking about goyim. So what do we see from there? We see that the lashon of atzil, greatness, is not something which can define only one person or two people. Limited amount of people can be a description for many people. Like in this case over here, Rashi is learning that it applies to Nadav, Avihu, and the Zakenim, a whole group of people that go into the category of Atzilei b'nei Yisrael. Why the other Mefarshei HaTorah, the Ramban, Even Ezra, and Sapona, why don't they bring all these rayas? The Rebbe says a few reasons. First of all, could be very simple. They don't bring them because Rashi already brought it. Rashi brought all the three rayas, so there's no need for them to elaborate and bring three rayas. Secondly, the Rebbe says they are not that much concerned with pshat and that much leaning towards the being limited to pshuta shel mikro as Rashi is. They are satisfied with one or two rayas. However, Rashi wants to explain it thoroughly, and pshuta shel mikro should be thoroughly understood. That is why Rashi has to come on to three rayas from three different psukim. As it's customary in the Farbrengens that the Rebbe also gives mashke for many occasions, public occasions that will be taking place within the next period of time, whether it's tonight or within the week and so. And the Rebbe, it's also customary that it's announced what particular event is taking place, whether it's a dinner, a Mlava Malka, or whatever it is. Rebbe also referred to the inyan which is taking place, the Farbrengen, has to do with Women's Institute. The Rebbe says, being that we've seen the attitude of the Rabbeim not to give mashke for affairs, for women affairs, so that is why rather than giving mashke, he will give the mezainis, he will give the cake from the Farbrengen, which that will be a participation in this particular affair. Talking about this inyan, Rebbe said, Bechlal, we find in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, we find the greatness of a Jewish woman. That Alter Rebbe in the last chelik of Shulchan Aruch discusses how a husband is supposed to take care of his wife. Bechal the Rebbe says in the Alter Rebbe, in the last chelik of Shulchan Aruch, there are very, very few halachas. And there is a halacha that a husband is supposed to be mechabda yoiser migufa. He's supposed to honor his wife more than he honors himself. The Rebbe says, who is himself? Himself, pshat is azay. A person himself is also kinyon, the guf. Alter Rebbe tells us there that the guf is kinyon shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The body of a yid does not belong to himself. It belongs to the Rebbeinu Shalom. And that is why the Rebbe says there are certain limitations how we are supposed to treat our guf. Example, Allah and Shulchan Aruch, that we are told that we're not allowed to eat in the street. It's not respectable for a person to eat in the street. If a person will say he doesn't care about his respect, he doesn't mind, he will eat in the street. So the halacha is no, it's not his respect. His body, one's body is kinyon shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's the Rebishtas. And we are not balabatim, we are not authorized to do anything with something which belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu against his will. In fact, this is the halacha which is also based why we are supposed to watch our health. Also for the same reason, Haguf Kinyon Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It is not ourselves; it's the Rebbeinu Shalom. It's Hashem's, and we have to watch what belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So, how dear and how precious our own body is, for the simple reason that it belongs to the Rebishter. Still we are told that when it comes to how we have to take care of the Yiddish Frau, a husband is supposed to take care of his wife to such an extent, she has to be taken care of, she has to be honored more than one takes care of himself, or more than one respects himself. He has to respect his own wife. And the Rebbe says, let us look into the Sedres which we have just read. This afternoon to Mincha, we're going to begin reading Parshas Truma. And in Parshas Truma, the Torah tells us how the Yidden have contributed towards the Mishkan. So we find, as the Yidden contributed towards the Mishkan, how the women excelled in their contributions more than the men, to such an extent that, first of all, they have used their skills to weave for the Mishkan, which is outstanding skills which they have donated to the Mishkan. And besides that, the women have given away their own jewelry to be used as contributions to erect the Mishkan. So again we see the chshivas of the Jewish woman. Also by Matan Torah, which we just read about in last week's Sedra. The introduction to Matan Torah was with the famous Chazal, Koi Soima lebeis Yaakov v'sagid lebnei Yisrael. So the Chazal tell us, Beis Yaakov elu hanoshim, v'sagid lebnei Yisrael elu ha'anoshim. So the Rabbeinu Shalom told Moshe Rabbeinu when he's going to address the Yidden about Matan Torah, first he should speak to the women, Sagid lebnei Yisrael, and then Koi Soima lebeis Yaakov, and then v'sagid lebnei Yisrael, then you should speak to the men. So again we see how the Torah respects the Jewish woman. Then the Rebbe says there's a Maimer in Lekutei Torah. I'm sorry, in Torah. A Torah, these are Mamorim of the Alter Rebbe. And who put together the Torah? The Torah was put together by the Tzemach Tzedek. In fact, it's a Maimer which deals with the Inyonim of Parshas Mishpatim, the beginning of Parshas Mishpatim, where the Torah discusses about a Jewish slave. So there's an Eved Ivri, an Eved Knani, a Jewish slave, a non-Jewish slave, and then we read about an Oma HaIvriya. Oma HaIvriya is a Jewish slave, a feminine Jewish slave, a Shifcha. It says, in the Alter Rebbe, in this particular Maimah, explains all these inyonim in Ruchnius, and spiritually. And he explains it, what's the meaning of an Eved Ivri spiritually, and an Eved Knani spiritually, and then the highest of these Madreges, this is what he explains regarding an Oma Ivri, the Jewish slave, the Jewish daughter who was sold to be a slave. And this he explains spiritually as the highest Madrege. The Rebbe says, interesting that when the Tzemach Tzedek writes about this Maimah, though we know we are not to give any comments on Inyonim and Torah, to say one Inyan is more chashiv than another Inyan, Mara tells us, it's not appropriate to say that one Inyan is enjoyable and another Inyan isn't. One Inyan is nice, another one isn't. From deswegen still, the Tzemach Tzedek, when he refers to this Maimah, the Alter Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek tells us that this Maimah is a very special Maimah of the Alter Rebbe. And he uses expressions, unusual expressions to describe the Maimah, which is something very unusual. And it's Tzemach Tzedek who's doing that. Also the Rebbe says, even al pi halacha, this is how the Alter Rebbe explains it in Pnimiyus Yonim, and spiritually in its levels, what it is meant, the spiritual levels of these things. Rebbe says, al pi halacha, there is also a halacha regarding an Oma Ivriya. Oma Ivriya, which is the Jewish daughter, which is sold. Why is she sold? Because she's in a poor home, and she's selling herself. Actually, her father, who still has an authority over her to sell her, is selling her, so this will ease his financial situation. This is Pashut what the halacha, what the Psukim is talking about. Then there's a halacha, as it's discussed in Gemara and it's discussed in Rambam, whom could she be sold to? She can be sold to only to such an odoin, to such a master, that ultimately either the master will be able to marry her, or the master's son will be able to marry her. Otherwise, we are not allowed to sell her to another master, to a different type of a master owner. She's not allowed to be sold. What does this show us? So Rebbe explained it because the ultimate goal of an Isha be Yisrael is to get married and put up a Yiddish mishpacha ksheira, mishpacha tahira. This is this is the ultimate goal of every Jewish girl. So the same thing over here we see. Even in such an extent, where a girl has to be sold because there's a tremendous poverty in the house, to such an extent that the father has to sell her and have this benefit of which this may ease his financial situation by selling her the couple of dollars or shkolim which he will gain from that. Still we are told whom is he allowed to sell her to? Only in such a way where she will be able to ultimately build a bayis b'Yisrael. So again we see the chshivas, the special chshivas which the Torah has given to an Isha b'Yisrael, as it is proven again from this angle. Statement from the Rebbe later in it. The Rebbe told this Reb Shimon Goldman to tell a story when he gave him the mashke for the Gemilas Chesed fund. So he told the story of Reb Matal Chernovla, who was a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov, who was traveling. Matal Chernovla was traveling to raise money for an Indian shul tzedakah. And he came to a place where he took a room in an inn, and then when it came to the time of Chatzos, Matal Chernovla woke up and he began to say Chatzos. And he was crying and weeping. Tikkun Chatzos, yeah. He was crying and weeping as a person of his caliber would by Tikkun Chatzos. The innkeeper heard the man who he rented the room to was crying and screaming, so he knocked on the door and went in and he said, "What's bothering you? Are you okay? Is anything hurting you?" She says, "No, thank God, I'm okay. Everything is okay." So he says, "If that's the case, why are you crying? What's bothering you?" So he was a very simple person, a very pashut yid. So he starts telling him that he's crying on the Churban HaBayis, on the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. He said, the man was very ignorant, didn't know much about it. So he starts telling him. He tells him, you know that thousands of years ago we had a Beis HaMikdash. And we lived in Eretz Yisrael. And the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. And we were driven out of Eretz Yisrael. He tells him all that. And what he's crying for is that the Rebbeinu Shalom should send Mashiach and take us back to Eretz Yisrael and give us again the Beis HaMikdash. So he asks this simple person, "No, you want to go back to Eretz Yisrael?" So he says, "Let me go and ask my wife." So he goes and wakes up his wife. He says, "You know, there's a rabbi here staying in our motel tonight, and he seems to be an El Chayid, and he's crying and he's weeping, and he's telling me a story that we were driven out of Eretz Yisrael, and he asks me if we want to go back to Eretz Yisrael." So she says, "Tell him no. I have my cow here, and I have my house, and we have our chickens, we have everything. I don't need Eretz Yisrael. Why should I want to go back to Eretz Yisrael?" He runs back to Reb Matal Chernovla, and he says what his wife told him. So Matal says, "But you know, could be those days the Yidden suffered from pogroms. There were the Cossacks that would come and make pogroms. He says, if we will go to Eretz Yisrael with Mashiach, then we wouldn't have this problem here. God, who knows? Chas v'sholem, any minute of the day, we are confronted with a problem of a pogrom." He says, "Wait, now, let me go and consult with my wife again." He runs back to his wife and consults with her. She says, "You know what? Tell him that let God send the Cossacks to Yerushalayim, and we'll stay here." So this is what Reb Shimon Goldman told. He said it's like a milsa de bedichas, a little joke. And later in the Farbrengen, towards the end, when the Rebbe was talking of the greatness of the Jewish woman, so the Rebbe says that every Jewish woman really wants to go out of Golus, and where there's no need for stories to describe the Jewish woman in any other way, and with tevets, he was praising how the chshivas of every Jewish woman are everyone really on their own, waiting for the coming of Mashiach, and really everyone wants to go out of Golus.